Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Fighting Matters. I'm Steve Kwan from BJJ Mental Models. I'm joined by my friends Mike Mahaffey from Old Bastard BJJ. How's it going, Mike?
Doing great. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing well. I got Jesse Walker from Rough Hands BJJ in Louisville, Kentucky, my favorite Kentucky gym. Jesse, how's it going, buddy?
What's up, everybody?
Happy to have you back. And of course, we got a first-timer here. We got a homeboy for me, someone who lives in my neck of the woods up here in Canada. I got Mack Lamoureux. Mack, how's it going, my friend?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on, boys.
So, man, I am excited to have this chat. We've been kind of back-channeling about this one for a while. This, I think, is a very educational topic that might catch a lot of jiu-jitsu people off guard, but you're probably the best in the business when it comes to explaining it. Maybe first, why don't we do a quick introduction, Mack? Do you want to explain your background and kind of the stuff that you work on just to give context to the audience?
Sure. Yeah, I've spent about the last decade reporting on far-right extremism in North America. For about 8 years, I was with Vice News, where I was a senior reporter there, working primarily on the extremism desk. My primary topics were very much like neo-Nazi organizing and the groups that exist in there. These kind of run the gamut from hardline skinhead groups to accelerationist neo-Nazis planning mass shootings, that sort of thing. Now I work with an organization called the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, where we study things that are threatening national security internationally, and terrorism. So I was able to kind of keep my study of focus after leaving Vice. And one of the things I've spent, years researching is these little things called active clubs, which I think we're here to talk about.
100%. Yeah, I want to dig into that. Now, also, you are, as far as I can tell, a jiu-jitsu guy, as we discovered prior to hitting the record button. This is kind of funny. I actually had no idea prior to recording, but you are very local to me. We live in the same province up here in Canada, and apparently, you know, audio listeners won't be able to tell, but judging from your shirt, I think we're actually in the same jiu-jitsu lineage too, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, I train out of West Coast Jiu-Jitsu in Victoria under John Coots. I'm a blue belt there. Been training this go-round for about 3 years. I trained in my early 20s as well, and I come from a wrestling background, and I just kind of, Jiu-Jitsu is the closest thing you can find to beer league wrestling, so here I am.
We did a whole podcast episode on that, specifically on BJJ Mental Models, about beer league jiu-jitsu and how it's the ultimate combat sport for old people who don't want to get beat up too badly.
Well, later on in this, if we want to get into it, as somebody that kind of deals with pretty heavy stuff, it's also just unbelievably good for the mental health and dealing with like anxiety and high stress.
And I think actually that aspect of jiu-jitsu, kind of the addictive nature, you know, you tell me if I'm wrong, but it's probably part of what makes it such a hotbed for things like active clubs, because it's such a powerful way to build community and identity. And we'll get into that in a second, but maybe first, explain this concept, because I'm going to guess many people in the audience hadn't heard this term. I certainly hadn't really heard it that often until Submitting Disinformation, which is just a fantastic social media account on Threads. They post about all sorts of stuff, about kind of the gross stuff that happens in the jiu-jitsu community, and they were talking about active clubs. Maybe explain this terminology, because when you hear the term active club, sounds great, right? I like being active. I like clubs, but it turns out when you put those two words together, it becomes something quite heinous.
Yeah, so active clubs are a series of small organizations that across the United States, Canada, they're international. You can find a couple of them in Sweden and in the UK. And what they essentially are neo-Nazi organizations, white supremacist organizations that recruit under and also organized around fitness. In many of the cases, these people will be teaching each other jiu-jitsu. They will be teaching each other Muay Thai. They're decentralized in nature. Anybody can kind of start up their own active club, but the way that these organizations work is they're very incestuous. So where their members are at times in membership with other groups, and they also have a lot of leeching into other groups, like think skinhead groups like the Hammerskins. They also have a lot of connection to Patriot Front, which is probably the most active white nationalist group in the United States right now. But then you go overseas to Sweden, they have connections to the Nordic resistance movement, which is a proscribed terrorist organization in Sweden. So they are probably, the best way to think of them is these little local groups of neo-Nazis training, while they won't say it outrightly, for a race war.
How do these people recruit? Because you brought up here that many of them don't advertise the fact that, hey, this is actually a neo-Nazi front. Do they anticipate just regular folks walking into the gym thinking they're going to learn jiu-jitsu or MMA, and then kind of over time they indoctrinate people? What's the onboarding process look like in terms of how they recruit?
Well, because of kind of their decentralized nature, it changes from group to group. And I've spoken to people in these organizations, and it runs a gamut. They do very much advertise to these pipelines, these kind of far-right pipelines, where it's very much go train white man, go join your group, and they can advertise that way. But they'll also recruit via word of mouth, and they'll recruit via posters in their group, where they will bring people on, and they won't, the term that is very often used in the community is show their power level for a little bit. And that's one thing that I find is really, really insidious of groups like this, is because all of us here know, and I spoke about it earlier, know the mental health benefits that come from doing this. You know how fucking good it feels going out and training and making friends and getting better at something. And you could really steer people down wrong paths with that feeling. So they're able to use the benefits of organizations like jiu-jitsu clubs, like Muay Thai clubs, to recruit for whatever they're recruiting for. Many times it's a race war. Other times it's just, you know what, hard to say, but it's horrible no matter what it is.
So what exactly are these guys training for? Like when we say race war, obviously this is going beyond just, casual racism. They're planning something. What exactly is the end game for these people?
Well, a lot of them, you see it in groups like this and in groups like the Boogaloo movement, and to a much more extent in groups like Acceleration Neo-Nazis. They're more or less training for, the term is when the shit hits the fan. When you talk about accelerationism, and not all active clubs are accelerationist, what that means is they want to accelerate the fall of society. They want to hasten its collapse. They think that society is slowly falling, so they want to push it to the moment where they can build up a white ethno-state from its ashes. So what these people are, not necessarily all of them are training for, but some of them certainly, is for an ensuing day where they can go out and they can, they have these termed Day of the Rope, where they hang all the degenerates and all the journalists and all the minorities for stuff like that. Yeah, happy thoughts.
Jesus, that's
really
dark.
Happy topic here. Yeah. As I said, this network is very decentralized, so it would be different from place to place, but that sort of accelerationist push is certainly within this organization.
So are some of these clubs existing within... I'm still trying to wrap my head around how these exist without people knowing about them. Do they exist within existing gyms, or is it like a small group of people in someone's basement? Like, how does that...
More so the latter. In many cases, what I've heard is it will be, say, a blue belt or a purple belt. I'm sure there are some black belts out there who know enough to, say, like, teach a weekend class. And they're taking people into sometimes even parks. They'll train in parks. They'll train in wherever they can. There are some that have actual gyms they train out of. There's one in Tennessee. The Tennessee Active Club has an actual gym. I've heard of them training out of sea cans with mats laid down in them. So it kind of differs from place to place. They aren't necessarily set up like your typical jiu-jitsu gym. They're more so under the radar, where it's word of mouth. You find out on it on an app like Telegram, on a lot more, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. You'll find them on there. And then you go and you meet up with them and you go that way. They won't have a brick and mortar store.
Interesting. Because, yeah, the question that came to my mind was, how do you, as a jiu-jitsu practitioner or potential jiu-jitsu practitioner, how do you avoid getting accidentally recruited into one of these? But it sounds like what you're saying is, for the most part, these people aren't running legitimate brick and mortar jiu-jitsu businesses. Like, you're probably not likely to find one of these by Google searching jiu-jitsu near me. It sounds like this is more kind of an underground thing that is kept mostly off the radar, and you kind of have to be looking for it to find it. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100% you'll have to be looking for it, but also you can be brought in there by somebody you know. They do actively recruit via word of mouth, where they bring in somebody they think with enough push could be somebody sympathetic to the cause. But yeah, it wouldn't be something you would necessarily find up on Google. As we know, there are some gyms out there that aren't that far off. But in terms of active clubs, they're going to be a lot more underground.
Got it. So what does the recruitment process look like? I mean, if someone were trying to recruit me into an active club, what would that process actually look like? Are there any tells or tactics that they use in the communications to try to sell or advertise or position this?
It would be very similar to what you would see in kind of other far-right recruiting. You would probably see a lot of the iconography, like the sun and rad, the black sun, 1488, which is the 14 words, which is a white nationalist slogan, 88, Heil Hitler. Don't clip that. And you don't... It's hard to say because of how decentralized it is. But in some ways, it could be very, very insidious. Of a lot of these people know that they have to keep their beliefs under wraps and have become extremely good at it. So it would be hard to say. But as you said earlier, many times you wouldn't find this without looking for it.
Got it. Something that is really frustrating for me, and you touched on this earlier, Mac, is that jiu-jitsu, the martial arts, they have such a powerful framework for improving your life. And it's not just because they help you get in shape or help you build confidence or teach you how to defend yourself. There's also this very powerful community element to training martial arts. I mean, people get into it for whatever reason, but they stay in it because of the people that they train with. And cults and other organizations that use cult-like tactics really exploit that. I mean, if you look at organizations that kind of adopt a cult playbook, a big part of what they do is they try to supplant your social network and the people who support you and replace them and force you to isolate from them so that they are now the source of your community and social interaction. And that just makes it way harder for you to leave. And I've seen this in jiu-jitsu gyms that are not necessarily active cults, but just gyms that kind of deploy duplicitous marketing. You know, they might try to use some of these similar tactics, and that's where a lot of the don't train with the club across the street comes from. But that's just a very minor example. I'm guessing that a lot of these organizations will probably deploy similar tactics as well to try to own people's community, to bring them in and make it so that it's hard for them to leave.
Oh yeah, 100%. Very much so. And that's something that's not necessarily new to active club. That's very much going back to, well, God, as far as in groups like insidious, like terrorist groups, organizations like this, creating a community is at the heart of these organizations. Go back to the Hammerskin days, the skinhead days. This is very much a place for wayward young men who are looking for something. There's a lot of gallows humor that comes when you're studying these things. And one of the things I always say is that we would have a lot less terrorism if they just found out about softball beforehand. And I think that's, rings true a little bit. Like, these are people that in many ways were searching for something, and what they were searching for was community, and they found it through these really awful groups. Of course, there are people, the true believers. I don't want to paint away that sort of thing. But I think what you were kind of saying there really hammers home a ring of truth there. It's communities at the heart of this.
Matt, let me ask you, it's a multi-part question. So since you started looking at active clubs, has the idea of the active club evolved any? And on kind of that same vein, do these active clubs participate in the larger jiu-jitsu community? Are these guys coming to Fuji competitions or, and one of the reasons I ask is I feel like, over the last 10 years, certainly we've seen an effort to start to normalize some of this bad behavior. And I'm really curious whether we're also seeing that, normalization attempt come out of these active clubs.
Yeah, well, active clubs have certainly evolved like anything else over time. They actually so the history of active clubs is they were started by this man named Robert Rundo. He got his start in the Southern California neo-Nazi street fighting community. He had this group called the Rise Above Movement, RAM, which he actually got charged for his activities. His court case is actually a long story that I won't get into, but he ended up being sentenced to 2 years in prison for rioting and conspiracy to riot. But Rundo got his inspiration from Eastern European organizing over there, the MMA culture in Eastern Europe, Ukraine. There was this particular organization and man named White Rex, who was very much the inspiration of these groups, these kind of white nationalist, white supremacist, neo-Nazi fight clubs, for lack of a better term. And so they came from over in Europe, and that's kind of how they got their footprint over here. They have changed over time in the way that any of these organizations do, in the fact that they're always playing kind of whack-a-mole with law enforcement and with journalists and with activists. But the heart of them has very much remained true. It's decentralized. Even though Robert did found it and he's a big inspiration, he's a big propaganda leader for it. He's not necessarily, and I believe he's, because of his court case, has renounced it. I should say that. Recently renounced the groups. But we know in many of these cases, people tend to jump back in over time. But the heart of it, a decentralized group where you're kind of running it yourself. You can start it yourself, and then if you're doing well enough, you can get the branding. That's remained since they've been founded about 6 years ago. They most certainly are taking part in tournaments. They have, I'm sure in some gyms, they know that there are kind of affiliates with them. And they're also hosting their own tournaments. In those cases, they typically only invite members of the movement to come do it, and then they film it for propaganda reasons that they then push out through video and all of that. They have a propaganda wing called Media to Rise, where they sell merch, and I believe they sell rash guards and like grappling shorts through there as well. And then there's other groups like the Wolves of Vinland, this very strange kind of far-right pagan organization. They have a jiu-jitsu club called Devotion Jiu-Jitsu, who has a pretty big YouTube presence. I believe one of their coaches at Devotion Jiu-Jitsu, which is different from active clubs, but they're their own kind of weird thing. took bronze in ADCC trials not too long ago. So, one of their purple belts. So they're very much out there and in the community. They just likely aren't competing under North Battleford active clubs. I do not know why I picked a very small Saskatchewan town, which does not have an active club, but they're not competing under the active club title. They would likely be competing under, a different title.
You bring up some interesting examples. It sounds in a lot of ways like these places are structured almost like a terrorist organization, which they presumably are, right? I mean, they kind of have these little splinter cells. They're heavily decentralized. They're hard to pin down. All of this presumably helps them escape law enforcement and helps them avoid getting caught. Am I correct in my assessment there?
Oh yeah, 100%. The model is very much built off what they feel they needed to do to survive, and it's what we're seeing in other groups. A group known as the Base, an accelerationist neo-Nazi group that I did a lot of work on, that members went to jail for planning attempted mass shootings and these other things. They were structured in a very, very similar way to active clubs. So yeah, very much take a nod from terrorist organizing. And in some ways, they're probably not all that far to being prescribed as a terrorist organization in some countries as well. In Canada, Proud Boys are a terrorist organization here. The Three Percenters are prescribed as a terrorist organization. So I don't think active clubs are that far off.
It sounds like the main reason why they might be avoiding that classification is just because of how small they are.
I don't know. It's hard to tell. Discussing terrorism prescription is a completely other podcast, but it's a whole bunch of political and other things that go into it. But that's something. But I would say they're one of the larger neo-Nazi if you take them as a whole, networks. I don't know if I should necessarily call them an organization. Maybe a network is a better way to describe them. They're one of the larger ones in the United States, and certainly in Canada.
Got it. Sorry, go on, Mike.
I was just going to ask, given how decentralized they are and how kind of under the radar they are there any tip-offs that like your average person in the jiu-jitsu community might be like, oh, I think that's an active club, or that guy I'm seeing at tournaments might be an issue, right?
It depends how good they are at OPSEC, how good they are at hiding it, because I don't think they necessarily want to show it off in a larger organization like that, because they would like to come back and still compete. The problem is, if you look for ACs, that's also athletic club. So you can't necessarily look for that, but it would be iconography. It would be their symbols. Son and Rad is a huge, huge thing for them. So if you're not familiar with that, that's the neo-Nazi black sun, which is kind of this circle with small rectangles coming out. I'm sure if I sent you a photo of it, you would recognize it. It's a pagan symbol. Many of them are into like runic stuff, like Thules, but so are other people that aren't necessarily, bad. They're just kind of dorky. So it's hard to tell.
I was going to say, these people sound like a bunch of total dorks to me, honestly.
Honestly, man, they are. They're just kind of like racist dorks. Like the thing they chose to be huge dorks about is race.
They're just like us, but racist.
Right.
Yeah.
They should just play D&D and not be racist. Like, come on.
I mean,
there's probably an argument to be made about that, right? Like a lot of, and this really gets into the incredible power of community, right? Once you get sucked into one of these groups, I mean, I think we've all experienced something similar in jiu-jitsu where, I mean, if you've ever had to leave a jiu-jitsu club, you probably had a moment where there was a good reason why you wanted to leave, but it was way harder than you likely expected because your entire community is there. And I've always, I mean, I know this happened to me. I remember when I started training jiu-jitsu, the first club that I went to, I got to around blue belt. And then the more I learned about the instructor and the culture there, the more that I realized this was not a fit for me. But it was still really hard to leave because I had spent years kind of building up my social circles there, and jiu-jitsu had become so important to me that I felt like, I was going to, if I left, I would lose all of those friendships. And of course, frankly, the gym, they exploit that, right? They'll always threaten to kick people out if they're not part of the, if they're not part of the club, so to speak, if they're not buying in and drinking the Kool-Aid. And I've always figured that that's probably part of how a lot of jiu-jitsu organizations get away with pretty awful shit, right? You talked earlier about how there's a difference between true believers and people who are kind of just along for the ride, which is fascinating to me because it sounds like you're saying there's people who might not be really believing in the cause here, but they're part of the organization because either the value of that community to them or the fear of reprisal or being ostracized and outcast is so high that they'll stick along for the ride, even though maybe they don't personally prescribe to these racist beliefs, but they're willing to turn a blind eye to it because they benefit from the community. Am I understanding correctly?
In some cases, for sure. Or you could be sucked into this community, kind of having, not fully being invested, and then over time, think of the frog in boiling water. You'll just become normalized to it, and then that will become your way of life, and then you will become a true believer. One of the things that I always think about when I think of this is think of a young, we've all seen it, like kind of a younger, out of shape guy comes into the gym and slowly starts to build confidence. He slowly starts to get in shape. He gets, for maybe the first time in his life, he becomes good at something. He starts seeing improvements. And that's huge for him, right? And now you do that for this guy. You give him this community and you say, and the reason this wasn't working for you before is because of this race here or this or that. You're able to really whisper some awful things in their ear and have huge influence over them because you've built this huge loyalty. You've built this feeling that we all have and we've all seen via martial arts.
Yeah. One of the things that I've observed is that you really can't overstate the power of community and direct connection when it comes to your ability to influence other people. I mean, as you know, there's a lot of pseudoscience that floats around in the jiu-jitsu space. And I've always wondered, how do these people buy into this stuff? Because you will hear people who will reject, medical advice that is proven time and time again, but then their jiu-jitsu buddy will tell them like, hey, go to Tijuana and get some stem cells injected in your neck and all your problems will go away. And they'll be like, sweet, that sounds great. And it's just not really rational thinking, but it really makes you understand that when you are looking at things like, evidence and big data, these are kind of abstract concepts that don't really touch you directly. But when someone in your community, someone who you directly train with every day, recommends something to you, it's going to carry a lot more weight, even if it's completely baseless or false or hateful. It's a very powerful influence mechanism. And that's something that I think we often don't talk about enough. We talk about influencing people through studies and data, but the most powerful way to influence a person is their buddy tells them to do something.
Yeah, trust goes so long. Familiarity, it just, I'm sure you guys have made jokes of a lot of coaches could more or less be cult leaders in gyms. And think of the sway that they have over their younger people, their younger students. And then think of if they were to use that, and as you guys mentioned earlier, some do, for pretty negative purposes. And you're going to be able to push somebody pretty far. What's like the worst thing you guys have seen and come across? It's not necessarily like active clubs, but is you've seen pushed on people.
So I actually do. I'm aware of an active club here in Kentucky that actually doesn't fit the stereotype we've talked about so far, which is one of the reasons I was curious about the evolution. Yeah. So it is well advertised public club, just a jiu-jitsu
Really?
club. Yes. It is an affiliate of one of the largest jiu-jitsu organizations in the country. I won't name it. And I happen to know a student that used to train there, and once they got their blue belt, it was revealed to them what was actually going on in the background, and that this wasn't, at least some portion of this club was an active club. And now that you've got your blue belt, we want you to be part of it.
I've definitely spoken to people who said that after a certain amount of time, they were kind of taken behind the scenes, and that's when they were shown it. The fact that, and I should say that most of my research on this kind of ceased at the start of 2024, would be 2024 is kind of when I moved on to other stories. But that's very fascinating. And yeah, them being kind of brought behind the curtain really rings home. What happened?
They left. They were obviously quite on the other end of the spectrum. I'm hoping to maybe get them on the show for a part 2 so we could talk to them some. I think it'd be a really fascinating conversation. But
you guys definitely should.
That to me feels even scarier, because now they're hiding in plain sight, where children and everybody else can just walk in and start getting indoctrinated to this stuff.
Or that maybe they're not even hiding anymore, which is the thing that terrifies me. And I mean, Mack, you tell me if I'm wrong here, but it really feels like in the last few years, there has been a push within our community to normalize a lot of this stuff. Whereas in the past, although these clubs existed, there was at least an understanding that this was horrific shit and no one should be involved in that. Whereas now it really feels like, I mean, you're seeing a lot of these people who are openly expressing and espousing neo-Nazi beliefs, and they're operating at the highest levels of this sport, and they're getting opportunities. People are sponsoring them. People are promoting them. And it really feels to me like this is a dangerous big step in a new direction. Am I misunderstanding, or is this something that's actually always been around?
Certainly the element have always been around, but I think it's mirroring society as a whole. Altogether, we're seeing a massive push in that direction, not just in the jiu-jitsu community or the mixed martial art community. We're seeing it across the board. We're seeing this reactionary movement kind of take hold, whether it be in politics, whether it be in kind of culture, tech. It's something that I certainly think is not just necessarily in the jiu-jitsu community. I'm very, very lucky to train in a very, very welcoming gym with a really open-minded and smart coach, and it's very top down, so it's a very welcoming, good organization. But I think I would have my eyes closed if I said that I haven't seen kind of this normalization of, I don't even know exactly how you would necessarily say it, but like far right push, not far right push, but like far right ideology, far right rhetoric.
It feels to me like
there's also bit of normalization in regards to, like, I don't know if I want to use the term like sex pests, but like that sort of thing as well.
We've talked about that.
Use the
So
term.
it's not just this.
Yeah, we talked about this quite a bit, and this is something that it really kind of worries me. Is there has been a push by these people and their supporters to normalize this kind of thing and to give them a spot at the table where they can then continue to, benefit from that platform and espouse their beliefs and recruit. And the examples, I mean, this is happening in a lot of ways. I think it's just a broader general decline in the ethics of our society. It feels like there's an ethical rot going on. And in jiu-jitsu, we very much see that, right? It's like you talked about. I mean, if you look at, ADCC brackets or even CJI brackets, you can find, people who have been incredibly accused of, or of just heinous things, both from a sex predator standpoint, from in some cases Holocaust denial and neo-Nazi talking points. These people are continuing to get opportunities, and it feels like there has been a push by these people to earn a spot at the table so that they can be one, because once they're allowed to sit at the table, then they've been normalized, and it's a lot easier for them to spew their shit.
Right.
The example that I keep hearing is, you hear folks like, Bryce Mitchell and Kyle Boehm getting these opportunities and getting roles. People are coming out and criticizing, saying you're platforming a Holocaust denier. And the answer you always hear is, well, that's their freedom of speech. They have freedom of speech. And so and the problem is when you allow that kind of stuff to happen, first of all, that's a tremendous misunderstanding of what freedom of speech rights actually mean. But that's maybe a topic for a different episode of this podcast. But beyond that, it allows them then to normalize. And next thing you know, you've got Holocaust deniers in your organization. And the more you allow that, the more you normalize that, and the easier it becomes for these people to recruit. I'm a big believer that, in the paradox of tolerance, you need to stamp this shit out as soon as you see it. But I'd love to know, Mack, from your perspective, what can and should they do in the face of these kind of people crawling out of the woodwork and trying to get a seat at their table?
God, that's $1 million question, isn't it? Like, are you familiar with the idea of the Overton window?
Yes. But maybe explain it just to be clear.
Yeah, so the Overton window is the window of what we deem acceptable in society. And essentially what the far right are trying to do is push the Overton window of what we deem as acceptable. In many cases, that means by going way across the line. So they push it over just by pure force of will. But in other cases, it could be just, as you were talking about, letting somebody down at the table, legitimizing these people. And it's not necessarily it's not just people that are active right now that I'm thinking of people like Jake Shields, somebody that has been known for quite a while, that is influential. And for years we've known he's had shitty politics, but only in the last year or two has he really come out and, as I mentioned earlier, shown his power level.
Is that so? They actually say that, show your power level, like they're doing some sort of like Marvel superhero power ranking. That's fucking dorky as hell.
It's super dorky. Meme culture is huge in this community. It's huge. They love meme culture. I believe show your power level comes from a Dragon Ball Z meme.
Over 9,000.
Yeah, I think so. I could be wrong. But yeah, they love that dorky shit. They're always constantly making edits of them kind of flopping around, doing real shitty half guard and putting like weird fash wave techno music to it. And,
but I mean, as a dork, I'm offended. Like, don't steal my nerd
They're
shit.
appropriating our culture. I mean, this is
I mean, seriously though, sorry to interrupt, but
no, but in all seriousness, I mean, I think what we're seeing is we are right now in real time kind of seeing some of this stuff bleed out from active clubs to the greater, community of jiu-jitsu and combat sports in general, which is a real fucking problem.
I mean, that's the whole reason we created this show, is to try to get a toehold in normalizing speaking out about stuff like this. Like, so many people are just like, I'm not a school owner, but I'm a black belt and I'm a coach and I've been in martial arts since I was a kid. And like, I want to normalize. I'm speaking out against this stuff. When so many people just keep their mouths shut and don't want to call attention to themselves for whatever reason, they're nervous to say something. They're like, that's the whole reason we started doing this podcast. And it infuriates me when people continually give spaces at the table to people with shitty, racist ideologies under the guise of free speech, or, saying bullshit like, oh, you're being so tolerant there, why can't he speak his mind? Because if he had his way, a whole swath of our community would be killed. Like, that's what it boils down to. Sorry, I'm going off on a rant. I
think what you guys are doing is also, this podcast is rad. I'm very happy you guys started it. There's
you.
me, shout out Damon, at my club, who are kind of like the dyed in the wool lefties, and constantly nicely pushing back on some ideas. But I think it does come down to the influential people in the community, not necessarily like the Gordon Ryans or those people in the community, but people like yourselves. I don't know, never heard his name. But the people like yourselves who do have a little bit of influence, maybe more so on a local level than on an international level, who can, when you're seeing your young student, shooting his fucking mouth off about stuff he doesn't necessarily thought through, can, even though maybe you do want to slap a ghillie on him or something, you do just walk him through it. This is why this is a bad idea. This is terrible. Don't yada, yada, yada. And do it in a way where you're not necessarily hardening their beliefs, kicking them out, that sort of thing. But there needs to be pushback, and it needs to happen. Because this is something, as somebody who has been following the rise of the far right and following these kind of really insidious groups that have, active clubs haven't resulted in people's deaths, but similar groups to the active clubs have certainly killed people. They're winning, they're growing, and there needs to be pushback. And that comes down very much on a local level. People like us.
So
I have sorry, go. I just have a quick question for you, maybe before we hand it over to Jesse. Maybe we don't know, because you mentioned this is very decentralized and they try to fly under the radar, but do we have a handle on how big this problem really is? Like, do we know how many of these active clubs are operating in North America at the moment, or is it impossible to say?
I sure do. I work with this great analyst, and I told him I was coming on this podcast, and his whole job is monitoring these groups. And he said, he sent me a spreadsheet with all of them, and there are upwards of, I would say, 50 of these groups across the United States. 70. The thing is, a lot of them open and shut. They do kind of come and go. But there's quite a few of them. If you're in a major city, more likely than not, you have an active club.
So some of our listeners knew we were going to have this conversation and loaded us up with some questions that they wanted answered. One of the big ones that I thought was interesting was this idea of naming and shaming. And is it something that we should do, or is it likely to have some Streisand effect that we unintentionally bring more attention to them and get them more membership? What are your thoughts on that, if any?
Oh yeah, no, I have huge thoughts on this. There's this idea that I'm a true believer of called the oxygen of amplification, which has to do with ethically speaking about these groups and reporting on these groups. Not necessarily giving them more oxygen than they need, not pushing them out in a way that you are going to funnel people towards them. The thing about this with the active clubs is the active clubs have, for lack of a better term, already broken containment. But I do think there's a reason I'm not using any direct active club names. I think I maybe mentioned one city that they're actually in. I'm trying not to use prominent leaders in it. They're their names. I certainly advise you guys not to link to any sort of actual primary sources. Definitely link to articles and stuff about it. But naming and shaming has its place. You have to be smart about it. Do you think that they're talking about what we're doing here, speaking about them, or are they talking about more like the doxing of the leaders of these groups?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably talking less about what we're doing now and more like, hey, I found out there's a club in my city. I'm going to talk about it in the local jiu-jitsu Facebook group. or what I'm not exactly sure what that would look like, but somehow bringing it to attention that particular bad actor or actors.
I think bringing it to, at the very least, the community's attention is probably a good thing, because we spoke to how sly they can be at recruiting. And by having it out there that these organizations are connected to active clubs or anything, could be a good thing. Of course, it's a case-by-case basis. Of course, everything always exists in the gray. You could do that and it could backfire horribly, and I'm going to look like a huge idiot. But I think there's a place for that for sure. I don't know necessarily if it would be good if there's a young guy who just started out with one of these active clubs ruining his life. Maybe more try and speak to him and bring him back. Having your name connected to a neo-Nazi movement, as somebody who's done it, can very much wreck a life. But I think organizationally, definitely be like, this group is fucking Nazis. For sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting...
No, I think that's a great answer.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem for sure. I struggle with this a lot when it comes to how do I deal with people who are clearly just trying to piggyback on top of what I'm doing to spew negativity. I mean, Mike and Jesse can vouch for this. We get some weird comments doing this particular show, right? And the way that most people would engage with that is they kind of start a war in the comments and they go back and forth and and honestly a lot of people like that kind of thing because it's engagement, and engagement pleases the algorithm. My take has always been, if someone's going to go in our comments and say something that is just absolutely abhorrent, I nuke it. I don't want to engage with them. And in fact, I try not to spend too much time on platforms where I don't have the ability to nuke those awful comments, because I know that what's happening is these shitheads are trying to use our platform to leapfrog and to get their own ideas out in front of our audience. And yeah, maybe 99% of the people listening will find it abhorrent that they said what they said, but that other 1%, that's a new market for those people. And I would rather give them no oxygen and just remove it. As soon as you start engaging with them and promoting it, you Streisand them, like Jesse said. And so it's a delicate balance, because on one hand, you want to speak up for what's right, but on the other hand, you also run the risk of giving that person a platform they might have otherwise not had. I mean, as a fellow Canadian, Mac, something that I have been pleased about in our culture up here in Canada is, we don't have that many like terrorist attacks or mass shootings as compared to in the States. But one thing that I've seen in Canada, I don't know if they're still doing it now, but if you remember, there was a shooting at a government building. I believe it was the Parliament building several years ago. And they were able to neutralize the shooter. And one of the things that really made me proud to be a Canadian was the news made a point of not glamorizing the shooter. A lot of them didn't even announce this person's name. I don't even know who this person was. They talked instead about the victims, which I thought was huge, because if you start amplifying the shooter and then you start publishing their manifesto and you give them a week-long news cycle about like what was going through his mind when he did this, now you're playing into what they want, right? And to make them disappear silently and to focus on the victims instead, I think is a much more powerful vehicle for dealing with those kinds of shitty people.
And it enrages them when we nuke their comments.
They get so mad.
Good.
They get so mad.
They go through other channels to try to attack us as well. It's wonderful.
Yeah, which reveals the whole game, right? Like this is for attention for them. And the thing that you can do if you start arguing with them, that legitimizes them and gives them attention. So they're gleefully happy about that. The thing that really enrages them is when you don't respond and you just remove what they were saying. You just make them disappear. That is the most effective way I have found to dealing with these people on a one-on-one basis. But again, it's a tricky balance, because on one hand, we're obligated to speak out, but on the other hand, we don't want to give oxygen to a fire that we need to contain.
I think just by the fact you guys are thinking of this, obviously, deeply and thoroughly, is going to put you on you're miles ahead of many other people in your position. It's something that I've had to reckon with my own reporting on these groups. In some cases, have I bolstered membership for chasing a story I thought was interesting that maybe I should have just let it be. And I think there's no easy answer. And the answer I can give is you just need to think about it, and you need to have it front of mind when you're doing things like this.
How did you take care of your own mental health diving into such horrid stories and, you know, dealing with such horrid subjects as like active clubs and extremism?
Oh man, and I was also for a little bit of time handled a lot of the mass shootings in the United States for Vice, and like that stuff will get to you too. And I'm working on a book right now that deals with cult victims. It's gonna feel like I'm being a little hokey here because of what show I'm on, but Jiu-Jitsu has been unbelievable for it. In many cases, after a really bad, stressful day, if I go and spend, 2 or 3 hours on the mats, getting my shit kicked in, I feel way better. I'm a big believer in the fact that kind of trauma, that kind of anxiety creates energy in you, and you need to expel that energy in a way. And so I would go there and I would find my good training partners and I would have hard rolls. So in a big way, it's that. In other ways, it's compartmentalizing, and just taking time. And you do become hardened after, you see enough death, you've seen enough darkness, you become a little hardened to it.
Yeah.
So fun. Aren't you guys happy you had me on?
Well, we knew what we were getting into. One thing I just want to add here, and then I'll maybe pass it, Mike and Jesse, over to you guys to add any final thoughts. Something you touched on, Mac, which I think was really great, is you talked about the power of the senior person in the room to influence those new people and to use the fact that you have a direct connection with them and how powerful that is. And I'll share an observation, right? I mean, BJJ Mental Models, my other podcast, has a pretty broad reach, and we've featured a lot of the best, biggest athletes in the sport, people with massive followings. And something that I've observed working with those people is they may have big followings, but they're not heavily engaged followings. I've always been so shocked to find out that, you can have a world-class celebrity athlete on your podcast, and it won't really move the needle that much. It won't really give you the boost that you would expect it to. But then you get some local guy or local girl who's just an instructor, but a really beloved instructor in their area. And that conversation can resonate way more than the one with the celebrity influencer. And what I've come to learn over time is that a lot of these people who have these big, broad audiences, they don't really have any real direct connection with those people. Yeah, they got a lot of followers, but they're very soft followers. I'm just following you because I want to see your posts. I don't have any relationship with you. I don't even really care about you. You're just a figure in the space, and I feel like I should follow you. So the engagement is really low. But the people who have really moved the needle for me, and people who listen to BJJ Mental Models may have noticed this over the last year or two, I moved away from trying to get the big names on the sport, and now I try to feature people who have strong community presence. They are way better at moving the needle in terms of growing my podcast, my business, in terms of advocating for things. Their message matters a lot more because even though their platform is a fraction of the size of the celebrities, the level of engagement they have is so much higher. And I think a big part of that is because they have those direct one-on-one connections, right? Something that a lot of these far-right groups understand that the rest of us really need to learn is the power of direct community and direct connection, right? And you've got to be able to penetrate local community and speak to people where they are on a one-on-one basis. The facts and the data don't matter if the other guy or other girl has that direct connection and they can influence you at a human-to-human level, right? Facts are secondary to our emotions as human beings. As much as we would like to claim that we're rational, it is our need for community and tribe that ultimately is what steers most of our decision-making. And I would always say that if you are a jiu-jitsu coach, even if you've only got 500 followers on Instagram, don't underestimate your power to make a difference by speaking up about things that matter. Like I said, if I had to have a huge endorsement from small local gym owners versus a huge endorsement from a jiu-jitsu person with 500,000 subscribers, I can tell you from experience, it's better to have the local support because those people have more pull over the people that follow them. Whereas most of the people who have a lot of followers, they're just ideas. No one, you might follow them, you might like their posts, but no one really cares about those people. It is the local coaches who connect with people one-on-one who can actually influence and steer behavior.
I may have told you, Steve and Jesse, but we have, so Mac, I train in Lansing, Michigan, and I don't own the gym, but I've been there. Steve and Jesse both know our owners, and I've been there since day one, since the gym opened its doors, 18 plus years ago. And we had a student who moved across the country into our city and had heard not only BJJ Meta Models, but Fighting Matters, and came to the gym because he was like, I knew you were here, Mike. I didn't know you, but I knew you were here, and I knew this would be a safe gym to train at. And like that just blew me away. Like that made me so happy that, so I just want to second like what you're saying, Steve. And I think it's especially important given this subject. Like I'm hearing us talk about these active clubs, and I'm thinking about what we could do at the grassroots level to combat them. And what I'm thinking in my head is that the best way is just to be a good coach, like be a good person, like provide that positive community to counteract what the active clubs are doing. Right? Does that?
We need to create an inactive club, just the complete opposite.
Oh my God.
But that's the thing, right? That's the thing. A lot of the newcomers, the recruits, aren't necessarily attracted to the hate. Mac, I think you said something about being a true believer. Some of them might not be. What they're looking for is community in a lot of cases. And if we can make sure that people know that we're available to be that community, I think we have an opportunity to grab some of these younger folks before they get sucked down into some of these darker tunnels.
Yeah, the way the world is right now, there are a lot of angry young men, and I think they have a lot of reason to be angry right now. In many cases, there's not that great of work opportunities for them. There's not very good options for housing. The future doesn't look all that great. These are people that could be sucked into these organizations. They just need a little bit of a steer, and that's where I think people like you could come in and help them out. Maybe push that anger in the right direction, because the qualities of life that kind of create the people that are susceptible for this kind of radicalization aren't going away anytime soon. So I think the best way you can do to try and counteract these active clubs is on a local level.
Awesome. Super well said. Mike, Jesse, any other questions or closing thoughts you guys wanted to add?
No, I think this has been awesome. I really appreciate your time, Mac. This has been very enlightening.
Yeah,
this has been wonderful.
I was really looking forward to this conversation and wanted to make sure that I could be available for it. So thank you, Mac. It was really, really time well spent. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mac, let's plug your stuff. You've got some work that you've already done, and you've got some exciting projects coming up. If people want to follow you or ask you questions or just kind of see what you've worked on, maybe support you somehow, let's do the plugs. How can they do that?
Yeah, for sure. I'm not that active on social media these days because I have been hiding away writing a book for the last year. It's a book about QAnon cults based on one in Canada. You will be able to find that published next August through Penguin Random House.
We have a QAnon cult in Canada?
We sure do.
God, it's my gym, isn't it? Please tell me it's not my
It's not
gym.
your gym.
Okay, thanks.
They live in an abandoned school in rural Saskatchewan, and you can read all about it in August 2026. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm on there at my name, Mack Lamoureux. And I believe I'm also on Blue Sky. And that's about it, because I really kind of hate social media. But I'm there, and sometimes I'll post.
Yep. I am a big fan of Blue Sky. I wish that it would kind of hit that big leapfrog and grow to the next level, because just in terms of what the platform has the potential to do, I think it's fantastic. I think it solves for most of the problems that algorithmically pushed content create. It's just a matter of getting more people on there and posting about regular stuff. Because right now it's mostly like Twitter expats who have just abandoned that platform, and so it's very political heavy. But I want to see more people on there posting about jiu-jitsu. So if anyone out there
and their dogs,
you need more dog photos, cat photos, and just random jiu-jitsu stream of consciousness crap. That's what we need on Blue Sky to make that thing take off. Awesome. Well, Mack, thank you so much for doing this, man. I really appreciate this. Mike and Jesse, I second what you said. This is a fantastic chat. I think we were able to get a lot of really useful information that people in jiu-jitsu need to understand, right? Because this shit does exist out there. And I think everyone, even the most local of local coaches, has more power than they think to push back on this.
Thank you so much for having me on, boys. I really appreciate it. And I really love what you guys are doing with this podcast.
Most welcome. Thanks to the listeners, too. Really appreciate people hanging out here with us. And we will talk to you in the next one. See you then.